So the Prime Minister will today tell world leaders to increase their military budgets to deter Vladimir Putin at a major NATO summit in Lithuania.
So Rishi Sunak will back further support for Ukraine with a recommendation that all members spend 2% of their economic output on defence, which is currently only done by 11 out of 31, including Germany, who of course don't pay their share.
So joining us now is Major General Chip Chapman. Good morning, Chip. Great to see you. Now, of course, NATO was set up after the Second World War to make the world a safer place. Does it still achieve that aim, in your view?
Well, that wasn't really what it was set up to do. It was set up to make sure that the interests of its members were protected and that it would go to war collectively if they were threatened and invaded by people. That still pertains. It has to be credible for them to do that. It still pertains because there's an expansionist threat in Europe. That is why in the last year we've had Finland join as the 31st member, and why last night we had Sweden unlocked, really, with Turkey now agreeing to it to become the 32nd member. So it is still relevant. The reason that Sweden and Finland joined was because they still fear this revanchist Russia. And so, yeah, its relevance is there, particularly in Article 5, that if any NATO country is invaded, then it's collective security for all.
But isn't it outrageous, Chip, that still only 11 out of 31 countries are paying that 2%? We're one of them, of course. Britain, the United States pay the lion's share. But countries like Germany and France, wealthy countries, are not paying their fair share.
Yeah, it is. You have to understand where the 2% came from. So the 2% came from the 2014 summit, which is, of course, the same year that Russia illegally annexed Crimea and went into the Donbass. And in 2014, it was the aiming mark that by 2024, people would get to 2%. So this will be reiterated today in 2023, that all nations should try and go to 2%. Now, many people would say that 2% is strategically illiterate. And one of the other things that is going to come out of this is that we are going to go to a deterrence and defence of the Euro-Atlantic new concept, which will be based on three things. Firstly, defence of the High North, which really impacts on the UK and the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. Secondly, the centre, the defence of continental Europe. And thirdly, the southeast, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, where, again, Gibraltar becomes important. So it's the new plans, strategic plans and regional plans, which should come out of the Vilnius conference, which will drive the structure, operations, activities and investment for the future, including command and control changes. And that should be the catalyst for people going towards 2% in a coherent military fashion.
Chip, let me ask you about the news we had this week about America providing cluster bombs to the Ukrainians. What was your view of that decision?
Well, you've got to answer the question, why were they provided? Now, from the perspective of international law, both Ukraine, Russia and the US are not a signatory to the 2008 Cluster Munitions Treaty. The UK is, which is why Rishi Sunak had to be very, very careful, because under the provisions of that, you're not allowed to either give them, which we don't have, nor should you endorse any other person doing that. Now, they were given because there is a capability gap. That is, that the amount of artillery that the Ukrainians have is far less than the Russians. So from a perspective of targeting and proportionality and distinction, because the Ukrainians say that they will only use them against Russian military targets in Ukrainian sovereign territory, and they will not be used on urban areas, as, for example, the Russians did when they were attacking Kharkiv last year. It makes military sense. It might be morally distasteful, but it is not illegal, and the Ukrainians need it if they're to be sustained on the battlefield at the moment.
The worry is, and you don't need me to tell you this, Chip, that they hang around a long time, these cluster bombs, and they could wreak havoc on civilians.
That is absolutely the case, but most of the weapons which are being used, unless they're small arms, have a wide area effect. Artillery has a wide area effect, drones have a wide area effect, and Russian missiles have a wide area effect. So there is still, of course, a sort of iron harvest being dug up every year from the First World War in the Somme and Passchendaele. So there's nothing exclusive about these weapons. which is actually any different than munitions which are hanging around the battlefield. The thing about the provision of American weapons is that under American law, the dud rate cannot be larger than 1% or 2.5% if it's authorized. The dud rate of Russian cluster munitions used so far is in the order of 40%. Of Ukrainian weapons, it's 20%. This is partially to do with the fact that the Russians often hold on to munitions way past their sort of sell-by date and a sort of shelf life, and propellants degrade.
OK, thank you, Chip. Major General Chip Chapman there. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Former head of counter-terrorism, of course, at the MOD.